Hello there. This is Discussing New Approaches, the thought leadership series where we delve into the DNA of strategy. I'm your host, Eric Walker-Rawson, and today I'm joined by Simon Wallace, who has built a career in data science and strategy, so working in leadership positions in large-scale businesses as well as startups. And he's now the founder of Demonstrandum AI and data consultancy. And I believe you have a product going into closed beta in January, don't you, Simon?
Yeah, thanks for having me, Eric. It's an absolute pleasure. Looking forward to this conversation. Yeah, Demonstrandum I founded a couple of years ago with the objective of democratizing data to increase effectiveness. And as part of that mission, what we've been doing is identifying products and industries which we can build to help democratize that data. And as you mentioned, the first one, which we announced yesterday as this goes out, is one called Vendo, which is designed to help democratize AI and data within the marketing space. And it's really proud of the work that we've managed to be able to do. Really proud of what's there, and really excited to see what happens as it goes out to market in the closed beta and the start of the new year.
Amazing. I'd be excited to see it launch, to be honest. I mean, we've been talking about it for a little bit. And I've actually noticed from our previous conversations about Vendo that you're putting quite a high importance on SMEs. So I think really the topic of this conversation is what's the reason behind that? Why are you focusing specifically on SMEs?
Yeah, absolutely. And it's a difficult thing with any product, identifying where you want to target, what market you want to go after. And our early research really kind of focused in and honed in on the fact that as the last estimates in 2022, there are 5.5 million SMEs in the UK.
Wow.
You know, they account for 2.1 trillion pounds in turnover, and they employ 16.4 million people in the UK. It's such a fertile market. And there's such a huge breadth of opportunity to be able to test ideas, develop ideas. And I think the potential for change in your product doing good, not just from a fiscal perspective, but from a, societal perspective, being able to implement change and those aspects. I think the SME market is such a fertile proving ground for that. And yeah, that's why we're focusing on SME so much, because there is so much potential, so much growth that can happen in those markets. And sometimes I have a feeling that it's not as well served as other larger businesses, right? Because it's harder. I'm not going to sit here and say every advisor who I've spoken to regarding this has gone, yeah, SME's great approach. A lot of them have said, it's going to be a hard sell. You're going to have to push a lot. It's not going to be as easy as if you find a large client. And yeah, they're right. But the point is, you then become one of the myriad companies trying to fight for that top 10%, whilst where there's a huge majority of the workforce is kind of being left to be, well, we'll talk to you when you're big enough. I think that's kind of the issue that we're looking to solve. And especially with democratizing AI and data, that's a huge potential pool to be able to do that with.
I agree. I think it's again, I suppose, are you looking to target larger companies as well as SMEs, or are you having that sort of core SME focus, just out of interest?
It's a good question, because one could say that a larger business is an agglomeration of SMEs, right? Instead of having an individual marketing person, we have a marketing team, and they have their own P&L, and you have a sales team and they have their own P&L. So if you take a very reductive viewpoint of it, one could argue that it's very, very similar. And honestly, the way in which I've been exploring it is I think it's easier to scale up to a larger business from targeting SMEs than it is the other way around, right? If you set out to hit the large top 10% of companies and then later on try to adapt to SMEs, the problems are very, very different. And I would say that if you do the SME and scale up, it's probably slightly easier to attack. I'm big for my analogies, and anyone who's spoken to me for more than 10 minutes knows this. It's how do you eat an elephant? One bite at a time. And I think whilst, yes, I'm not going to say we're not going to hit and target those larger companies, I think the focus on SMEs gives that potential to grow and adapt to and learn, really. We're releasing a closed beta product. It's as much about learning as it is about delivery, about what works, what we can improve. And that will put us into a stronger position as we look to grow into those larger markets.
Definitely. And what do you think are those key problems that SMEs are facing that I suppose you're looking to solve?
I think there's lots of tools that are available towards SMEs, but there's not really, in my mind, a easy way in which SMEs can gain access to that next echelon, that next tier of thinking. When we look at marketing, you've got some of the largest marketing agencies in the world have some of the best minds and best thinking in the world, but that's locked away behind a very large bill, a very large invoice, and understandably so, right? They're a business at the end of the day and they have to do what they do. But I think where SMEs kind of lose out is they don't get access to that thinking until they've already got to the point where that thinking's not as beneficial as it was before. And that makes sense, right? The potential of that thinking, the way of approaching the work that I did with some of the, you mentioned I work for some large businesses. I worked for some large media agencies at the start of my career. The work that I was doing there, you get that into the hands of the SME, the potential impact is massive, right? And so I think that's where those challenges exist. How do you get access to something that to get access to it, you almost don't need it anymore? They still do, but you see that problem? It's that kind of push-pull, chicken and egg whole issue.
Yeah, no, I can understand. I mean, why do you think that support isn't being given? As like you mentioned in some of the statistics earlier, it's definitely a lucrative market. There's money there, but I suppose why isn't that support being given?
I think it's because of again, my advisors, my mentors, people who I've shown Vendo to, they've all said the same thing. The SME market is hard. You're selling. Now, granted, out of those 5.5 million SMEs in the UK, you don't need a lot of them to have a successful business, right? But you do need more of them than you do a big 10, big 20 company, right? You could get one or two of those and your company, as an SME yourself, most likely, is relatively secure, right?
Yeah.
But I think that's, I don't want to say wrong because everyone has different approaches, but in my mind, it isn't the best way of looking at this. It's no secret, and you and I have spoken at length privately about this. It's been a rough year in so many ways, with redundancies, with cost-cutting measures, with the tech and data market being through its most challenging period I think you and I have ever seen.
Mm.
If you lose one big company from your books, that can be monumentally catastrophic. But if you have a smaller portfolio-based business, right, working with multiple SMEs rather than 2 or 3 large businesses, you're not immune from it. Lots of them can go at the same time. How we can't afford this anymore. But it gives you a bit more of a cushion and a safety net. Because if you're taking 0.1% of those SMEs in your current base, well, that still leaves 99.9% of the other SMEs as potential clients. Now, no business is going to be able to serve 100% of the market, but I think you understand my point. But you have more flexibility and more opportunity, and you're prepared again for growing into those larger areas.
Yeah, and I would agree. Again, to your earlier point, I think it's definitely been a hectic year to say the least. And we as a recruitment agency, we definitely see that because we see the knock-on effect of not hiring. We see the knock-on effect of more people on the market, and I've seen this with other recruitment consultancies previously, and even internally as well, where you have consultants who do have that one big client, and this is on a sort of a micro level rather than a macro level, but I think it still applies, where you have one consultant who has a very strong client base with one particular client. As soon as that client leaves, it puts them in a very difficult position, especially if they've hung all of their hats on that one particular client as well. I suppose how do you change that mindset? How do you change companies from putting all their eggs in one basket? How do you? I suppose it's a shift in mentality, really, rather than anything else.
I don't know if you can, and it's kind of that sheltered reality. When I set out to build Demonstrandum, a lot of the work that we do as an AI and data consultancy is with smaller businesses. It is with startups. It's with angel investor networks. It's with some of the smaller, VC adjacent companies, right? We've always gone after the smaller market, not because we don't want to go after the larger ones, but because we see that potential. Is it hard? Yeah, but I don't necessarily think it's any harder than dealing with a large scale business. It's just different, right? Running versus swimming versus cycling in terms of exercise, right? I mean, some people will probably disagree with me on this. Not one of them isn't definitively easier than the other. They use different muscle groups, they use different skills and strategies, right? And I think that's the same with whether you go after a SME based approach or a large scale business approach. I think it's just that shift in mentality, and people view it as harder. But I don't necessarily know that it is.
Mm.
Because it's different.
Yeah, it's very different. And I suppose if people companies are looking to follow a similar focus, maybe, so what would be, and what do you see the larger economic impact of targeting and supporting those SMEs? I think that's probably one of the most important things to highlight.
Yeah, I think it's potentially massive. Is my honest opinion. You know, I quoted the figure from the government statistics from 2022, 16.4 million people. You know, Demonstrandum as a consultancy has always been about democratizing data to increase effectiveness and talking about change and the potential of data and AI. And when you have such a large aspect of the UK working inside of these businesses, you've got this room for growth. You know, there's a lot of talk by a lot of politicians about the UK being an economic powerhouse. Well, if we really want to be there, we need to support and grow businesses and continue creating that fertile ground for businesses to grow in. And part of that is if you nurture what is such a huge aspect of the UK, you end up then moving the conversation forward. You get people who are more used to revolutionary ideas. Sounds grandiose, but if you get people used to doing this when they go on to their next business or a larger business, they're not starting from scratch or butts. So you have that growth and that change potential with such a huge aspect of the market. And then also importantly, if you get a good SME based business, you know, I'm not going to sit here and sound altruistic here, but it is a potentially very lucrative business, right? Because you're dealing with a huge potential market, a huge potential opportunity. And I don't have any figures on this, but experience and gut will tell me a lot of the larger businesses struggle with the SME market too. So you then also become an attractive proposition. So I think you asked the larger economic impact. I think it's massive because if you take economic from a fiscal aspect, you've got potential growth and a huge potential revenue source. If you take economic from a more kind of socioeconomic aspect, you've got a huge set of a huge captive audience who are wanting to grow, and working in an SME is hard, right? Who are doing it because they want to push themselves and challenge. They're ripe for wanting to adopt and embrace change. So I think it is. To answer your question, I don't know the potential economic impact, but I reckon it's pretty big.
Amazing. I mean, we replicate that in what we do as well. So I love placing people into SMEs. I mean, you do have to, from a recruitment perspective, sell it correctly to people. I think, you know, it's like you said, it's not easy. In the same way that startups are a completely different world as well. You know, that's high risk, a lot of hard work, and I think SMEs are similar. It's just a different stage of growth, especially when compared to larger companies. But again, the potential impact on what you can do internally within the company, and we've seen it. We've placed people who are really intelligent people, and they've turned the company around in terms of what they've brought to the table, and that's just in data and sort of tech and sort of the AI areas that we work in. So I think it's also, I mean, I would say that because I'm a recruiter, but I would say it's a people focus. But then it's also, you know, that interpersonal element. You know, they larger companies, I think, when they're working with smaller startups, there's less of that people element, and I think with SMEs you can still retain that, which gets lost at a larger company focus.
I don't know if you found it, but when I've been working with SMEs, startups, or smaller businesses, I almost find that there's a bit more reticence, because a lot of them realize that every small decision is a big decision. When you're working with larger businesses, there's kind of a laissez-faire, well, this won't sink the company. But there's a lot more of a, well, every decision matters. Have you found that kind of similar challenge?
I have, yeah. I mean, we see it from a hiring perspective, because usually it usually comes down to the end processes and decisions being made on, whether they'll hire a candidate or not, and therefore it puts us on choosing the right candidate under a little bit, I suppose, more of a microscope in some ways. But yeah, companies might just hire just because they're 70-80% of the way there, but they can take more risks. And so I think for SMEs, choosing the right partner to partner with in an external partner especially is a lot more important. Again, larger companies, especially from a recruitment perspective, they might work with 10 at a large case, maybe more like 5 probably in most cases, but 5 or 10 recruitment suppliers. And those will be the core recruitment suppliers, and they'll it's a little bit chaotic, whereas SMEs will tend to go work with 1 or 2 most cases, I think, and that's just from my own personal experience. And it does tend to work better because you can build better relationships, and I think that's really where recruitment's heading anyway. It's the personal brand and people building. But I'm not sure if you found that in your work, sort of working in that sort of interpersonal capacity and being able to offer more value from that, I think most importantly.
I think there's a, I run an AI and data consultancy, so I'm always tarred by the big 4, right? I'm always tarred by, oh, we don't want to pay this to get a deck. It's like, well, that's not what all consultancies do, right? And so a lot of it is, and I imagine you have something very similar. You work in recruitment, right? It's perception busting, right? And I think that's easier when you're a startup or an SME yourself. Whereas, like, well, yeah, actually, I understand the challenges you're facing. I'm not wanting to come in here and, charge you £80,000 for a deck that's generated by a 2-year grad, right? That's not what we're trying to do. But I think that was something I was actually told we don't want. But that's the perception, I think. And I understand it, and they're naturally cautious, and I do get it. But I think you said that interpersonal relationship, I think that is what helps get past that barrier. And I think that growing that, building that, and having that rapport and trust is so important to actually being successful. Now, here's the issue. This is why every advisor and investor says, don't go after the SME market. Because how are you going to do that with 100, 1,000, 250? But you don't have to. After a while, the principle of flocking comes into account, right? I don't know anybody in Zero. What I do know, though, is Zero is used by a lot of SMEs in the UK. So that's my accounting software, is Zero. I've never spoken to anyone at Zero. I don't need that relationship, but I have that trust from that flocking mentality and approach. And I think that's the point where you kind of want to get to if you're selling into the SME market, is getting to that stage. But of course, everybody has a different approach to selling. It's like there's not a one size fits all, and you have to do what's right for your business. But I think there is huge potential there if you grow and focus on, well, where can, I'll rephrase it. There kind of becomes a point as a business leader where you have to sit and go, what am I building this business for? Why am I running this business? Is it to make as much money as possible? Is it to change something about the industry? Is it because it's a passion of mine? And if it's all of those 3, I think there's an argument to say, well, you have a huge return on investment. You have a huge potential to actually realize your goal within the SME market, because they're hungry for this technology. They want to be and use the things that the larger companies are. But sometimes they're locked behind such a high price tag. No SME is going to be able to do that. And that's especially something with Vendo that we worked very, very hard on, was making sure that we can have this price point at an affordable rate. So as it scales, and if we do go into the larger businesses, yeah, that scaling is there. So we're not going to lose out on potential revenue, but it's definitely designed so it can be attractive to as large a subset of the SME market as possible without devaluing the opportunity, the potential, or what's been done. But it's not exorbitantly high. And it's finding that balance and trade-off. And it's not clean, it's not simple, but I think when you get it, I know when I figured out our approach to the SME market, it made sense to me. Because I was, yeah, I can see that, I can see that, I can see that, and I can see how that works. Because working with SMEs and it clicks. But I don't think there is a one size fits all, and it requires some thinking and careful approach.
I agree. I think and the potential benefits are much higher for SMEs as well. How much money can they save with automation that will be crucial to that business, like we were mentioning earlier. Those revenue and cost saving can be, and obviously in a marketing sense, getting themselves out there is much more important in a sort of competitive market. And I suppose on that point, what do you think about the adoption of AI? Do you think it can help or hinder? I mean, as a AI consultancy, as you mentioned, I imagine you're leaning one way, but it'd be good to hear your thoughts.
No, we have no fixed opinion. Yes, of course, we think it's going to be very positive, naturally. I think you highlighted something and said something which is important to clarify. Cost cutting, money saving, yet these are potentials of AI, but unfortunately that's been conflated recently, especially in the past year, with redundancies and layoffs. And I don't see that as how AI can benefit. Vendo and Demonstrandum and all the tools that we're going to build as Demonstrandum are designed around the principle that human plus AI is better than the world's best AI. I was at a talk years ago, and the speaker said the next generation of AI will always be beaten by the current generation plus a human. And that ability, and we can let's not touch on the whole AGI aspect because that changes a whole bunch of conversations. But the combination of human plus AI is unbeatable because that lateral thinking, that divine spark that AI is missing, and it does a very good job of simulating, but doesn't have, is what makes it better. And so, we talk about adoption. I think the first thing is you're saving time or you're saving money. Well, okay, think about it more instead of, oh, I can do with one less employee. No. Think about it as, oh, I can get that employee to do this better. Think of it like power assisted steering, right? In the old cars where it was all rack and pinions and you're trying to turn around the corner on a cold day. No, power assisted steering makes that easier and you can go more, do more, drive longer. And I think that's how we want to, how I would always recommend businesses frame AI is a lot more as to what this can do. Now, you talk about how will adoption of AI in the industry, and I think in general we can talk about any industry in this regard because it's the same problems are being faced. What I have noticed, and this isn't industry specific, is a lot of the tech companies that are the second level removed, because OpenAI did a great job at hitting the right market at the right time with the right message.
Yeah, it's undeniable.
Yeah, and what was more impressive is they spoke to people where they were, where they are, not where they want to be. And when I've been advising companies, when I've been advising and mentoring, even small scale change within businesses, processes and data leaders trying to implement processes in businesses, the thing that I always say is it's no good you standing at the finish line shouting at people at the start line. You're there, it's there, you've done this path. For adoption to happen, you have to guide, you have to be there to talk people through it because and I'm not saying everyone, but change is scary. And people don't like change. So you have to make change reasonable and approached. And I think it's AI will change things. Now, I'm not old enough to remember when Excel came in, but I imagine there was probably a similar thing with accountants going, hang on, now this is going to do all that stuff for, like, it's, these things happen. And OpenAI won't be the last one I see in my professional career. It's all about making sure that you have the right plan, the right strategy in place. And that's something that Demonstrandum really focuses on, is your AI and your data adoption strategy, to make sure that you're building it and integrating it in the right way. Because as practitioners and as experts, we live this and we assume knowledge half the time. Not maliciously, it's ingrained. I think for AI adoption to be effective and for it to have the revolution that exists and the potential that exists, we have to learn from past mistakes, learn from past adoption errors, and say, okay, we know where we can get to, but let's help people get from where they are now to where they want to get to, rather than standing over here and shouting, hey, you guys should be here, get over here, because it's going to rubber band and it's not going to be sustained. And yeah, I think that's what adoption will look like. And where adoption will really succeed is when we find that balance between human and machine. And again, that's why Demonstrandum focuses on democratization. If people can understand, if people can see it, if people can use it, people get it, then that's going to be a more substantive and more long-standing change than just, hey, I've bought a subscription to ChatGPT, where I AI capable, you know? And I think that's where adoption is going to be really key, is making sure that we guide people, not just assume knowledge.
Perfect. I think, again, that's a really good point to end at, because again, it's that people focus, which I can definitely relate to in the job, because my job's all about people.
Yeah.
But thank you very much, Simon, for your time today.
It's been a pleasure, Eric.
Not a problem at all. You've been absolutely amazing and really interesting conversations.